Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to get started in just a minute. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, welcome to our webinar. I'm Lindsay. We're going to get started in just a minute. As you get settled, you'll see a question here on the screen. Feel free to answer it in the chat or on your own. So we will get started in about 60 seconds. So if you haven't already, either in the chat or on your own, just take a minute to ponder your answer to this question. How would a consistent onboarding impact your organization? Save time, minimize confusion? Yes, absolutely. Love that, Julia. What else? Yes, decrease time to productivity, totally. We're going to talk about some of the stats around why onboarding is so important related to productivity in just a little bit. Yeah, employees want to know what's expected of them, for sure. Give them clarity, consistency, lessen their anxiety, help set them up for success. Set the foundation. Yeah, all great answers. So we'll get started in about 30 seconds. So either on the chat or on your own, feel free to answer this question. We'd love to know what impact consistent onboarding would have for you. And in the chat, feel free to select to send your message to both panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your answers. High employee engagement. Yes, these are all fantastic responses. Completely agree. And with that last response, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our onboarding on, you guessed it, this webinar on how to create a consistent employee onboarding for hybrid work. My name is Lindsay. So excited to have you here today. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping, and these slides are meant to help us get clear and consistent, both on the how and the who and the what of our time together today. So here's what you can expect. Some of the how. We'll give you about 5 tips and have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to send us some questions, and then feel free to also use the chat. We want to hear from you and we want to know what's on your mind. Some of you already submitted some questions ahead of time, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And speaking of the chat, there was a question on the screen as you joined, which was to ask you what a consistent employee onboarding, what kind of impact it would have for your organization. So if you haven't already, take a little bit more time to think about your answer, or maybe modify it or put it in the chat. The reason we're doing that is we want to prime you and get you ready for what we're going to learn today. And you can do this for your organization as well. You can prime and get your new joiners ready in their pre-boarding by sending them messages or prompts like these that connect them to what they're going to experience when they join the company. So a lot of what we do today, hopefully you can use, and we'll model it for you here today. So you now know some of the how, and let's talk about the who. So my name is Lindsay, and I am the lead communication strategist here at PIN. And my job is to advise our customers on their employee communication strategy. One of these customers is Ashlyn Gagon from Lucid, and I'm so excited to have her here today. She'll introduce herself in just a second. And one of the reasons why I love my role at PIN is I'm able to combine both my background as a screenwriter and as an organizational psychologist, meaning I love helping customers write communication that doesn't just engage their employees, but also hopefully leads them to action and to insight. Before PIN, I spent about 10 years leading learning and development at high growth companies like Credit Karma and Flexport. So I've been in a lot of your shoes and led onboarding and understand a lot of your challenges. I think no one understands them more than Ashlyn. And so I'd love for her to introduce herself and say hello. How's it going, Ashlyn?
Good. Thanks, Lindsey. Like she said, my name is Ashlyn Gagon. I am a senior people operations specialist at Lucid. A little background on Lucid. So we're a software company whose mission is to help teams see and build the future through visual collaboration suite of products. So Lucid Spark, Lucid Chart Cloud Insights. And we are a high growth company, so just under 800 employees. We have offices in Australia, Netherlands, and Utah. And my role at Lucid as a senior people operations specialist is to onboard all of our new hires and help them have a great experience joining our organization. I also have a background in recruiting, and I'm really passionate about just the candidate experience, employee experience, and helping set everyone up for success along the way.
That's awesome. Ashlyn, I'm so happy you're here. And what she won't share, probably because she's too modest, is that Lucid recently won a couple of really amazing awards. One is the Fortune Best Workplaces in Tech 2021, which is fantastic. And then Parity.org's 2021 Best Companies for Women to Advance list. So I'm really excited to learn from you and from Lucid and clearly what you're doing so well. So we've talked about the how and the who. Now let's get into the what. So I mentioned that when you registered, you saw a prompt to give us your challenges and your questions. And here is a lot of what you said. So I'll give you all a second to read this over. I'm super glad someone mentioned creating consistency. Obviously, that's the topic of our webinar today, but also what consistency means. Not just location, but department, manager, geography, all of these things are important and require our consideration. A sense on the scope here today. What we're really talking about is the communication piece. So there's a lot that goes into onboarding, but what you can expect from our time together today is really about the communication. So less on the specific content and more on the process in which we go about onboarding folks. All right, a little bit more on the what. So putting all of this together, what are you going to walk away with today? Well, it's these 3 takeaways. This is what we'll accomplish together. And as you look through these takeaways, if there's something you don't see here that you're really hoping to learn, or something that we should know about you that makes this more relevant and applicable, please let us know in the chat. So it could be, hey, I just started in onboarding. This is my first time working on this process, or we're moving to hybrid next week. Whatever those things are that can make this more relevant to you, we want to know. So feel free to use the chat. All right. Last piece of housekeeping for you. So as we go today, you might hear some of these terms. And we wanted to give you a glossary to give you some consistency and help you know what to expect as we go through the webinar today. You can do this same thing for your employees. So you can also give them this consistency and a little bit of structure by providing them a glossary of terms that they'll hear across their onboarding. So 2 things to point out. One, you'll see that we say onboarding is the first 90 days. So very important. That's how we define it here. So it's not just that first week, but really the first 90 days. All right, so we've got the how, the who, the what, some glossary of terms, and let's dive in. So why are we here today? Why do we say that onboarding, hybrid onboarding is challenging? Well, the consistency is one aspect of it that makes it challenging, but we also know that there's a lot that goes into it. So keeping everyone in the loop, not just the handoff from recruiting, but to the hiring manager, perhaps a larger team. And again, the sense that we don't want to overwhelm our employees. We really want to create an experience that gives them the utmost support. Ashlyn, what would you say some of your challenges have been when you think about hybrid onboarding?
Yeah, well, just like many of you, we transitioned to the remote environment, and now we're looking to transition yet again to another way that we work now with the hybrid environment. And so we want to make sure too that our new hire experience is still engaging and consistent, but now with these new factors at play. So there's always going to be challenges and just a new environment to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of some of what folks said in the pre-questions. So certainly top of mind for a lot of us. And maybe one of your challenges is just keeping all those glossary of terms in your head. Maybe that's another challenge for you. So we will hopefully help you ease those challenges today. So why else is onboarding challenging? Just to set up the problem space and why we're here. So some stats. These stats are not meant to scare you. They're just meant to give us a common understanding. We know that poor onboarding is quite costly to our organization and to our people. But the good news is that strong onboarding actually can have a great effect on retention and productivity. Recent research by Glassdoor says that great onboarding or organizations with a strong onboarding process can improve retention by 82% and productivity by 70%, which is just amazing. Why is this also important? Well, onboarding is what we call a high leverage moment, meaning it's an opportunity where people are doing something for the first time and they're in a transition. That's a high leverage moment. They're in transition and doing something for the first time. And social science tells us that when someone is in a high leverage moment, that's when they're most open to our help and support. There's a crack in the window, there's a crack in the door, and they're open and willing to accept our support and help, meaning we have a hungry audience of new joiners. So it's our responsibility to help them. And we want to help you do that better. The intent here is really to take our onboarding from what might be informal or reactive and inconsistent to structured and strategic. And HCI, the Human Capital Institute, found that 58% of orgs had an inconsistent onboarding process. So we certainly want to improve that as well. So one of the ways to give you some consistency is to add some structure. So we're going to do that for you right now before we get started into the meat of our conversation and those tips that we're going to share. So you'll see 3 choices here, and I believe we're going to launch a poll in just a moment. We want to know from you, what bucket would you put yourself in terms of your needs right now? Are you looking to build from scratch? So perhaps you don't have an onboarding program or you're redoing it completely. So you're in the build from scratch category. Or are you renovating a room? You are perhaps looking to redo a part of the process like pre-boarding before people join. Or maybe you're looking to redecorate. So you're looking for just some tips and tricks. So we want to know, what bucket do you fall into? And what's most relevant for you today. So you should hopefully see a poll here and let us know what that answer is for you. %46% renovate. Fantastic. That's really helpful to know. Awesome. And hopefully we'll give you tips for each of these buckets as we go today. All right, Ashlyn, should we dive in? Should we give them what they came for, those 5 tips?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I was just thinking about as you were talking about like all of these different, phases that you might be as you're building out onboarding, I think that all of these tips are just going to be relevant for any stage that you're at. And really, I like how you said, Lindsey, a few slides back, how just open to the experience new hires are when they first start. And really, new hires are the most engaged when they first start at your organization. And so you really want to capitalize on that and make sure they maintain that engagement throughout their time at your organization. So really sets the tone.
I love that. And research from PIN actually backs up what you just said, Ashlyn. The first message that people receive on their first day is our most read and most clicked message across all of our customers, which tells us that yes, the engagement is the highest on that first day, that first moment. So like you said, we should really capitalize on that. All right, so our aim here today is to give you 5 ways to help make your hybrid onboarding more consistent. What you're going to see here is some ideas on breaking onboarding, what can typically be a complicated process, into its component parts, helping to simplify it and give it some structure. That's really our intent here. And hopefully with that structure, you can more easily scale your onboarding as you grow. So tip number 1 is to separate the synchronous from the asynchronous. And if you recall the glossary of terms from a few slides ago, what synchronous means is what we're doing right now. If you're live here on the webinar, you're synchronous. We're in the same space at the same time. If you're watching the webinar later, first of all, hello. And second of all, that's asynchronous. You're watching it on your own at a different time. We know that especially in a hybrid environment, it's very challenging to get everyone together at the same time, not just in Zoom, but in person. It's extra challenging these days. So one of the ways to simplify and add structure is to separate what needs to be together and synchronous versus what can be asynchronous. So the way to do that is not so much to focus on the information that you want to share, but on what we need from the people that we've gathered, meaning our new joiners. What requires their active participation versus more of their passive participation where they can just listen and absorb information. So the way to do this, or the way to start, is to ask yourself a few questions. What is it you need from your new employees? What needs to be done with all of them in the same room at the same time? I think gone are the days of the one and done, 1 day training where everyone's in the same room. Sadly, we remember those days. And part of the reason is, like we said, onboarding is not just 1 day, it's 90. So ask yourself, is it okay if I just push information on them, or do I need to pull everybody together? How do you do that more specifically? We'll give you some clues. The key here is to understand what outcome you need. So your outcome determines your strategy. Do you need employees to comply, meaning maybe fill out an immigration form or an I-9 form? Do you need to inform them or tell them about a policy? Or do you need to engage them, maybe get them excited and involved about the culture and values, help them feel connected to the organization, perhaps spark some behavior change? What is it that you need from your employees? What you need determines if you should bring them together or not. So more specifically, an easy way to think about this, hopefully, is the idea of push apart and pull together. You want to save the synchronous moments, the precious synchronous moments, from what needs to be for engagement. So there's a lot of information that we want to give our employees, especially when they join. And I think our tendency is to pull everyone together and share it all at the same time. Very hard to do in hybrid. So again, one of the suggestions here is to separate those two and more clearly and strategically use synchronous for what requires engagement. All right, tip number 2. So tip number 2 may be my favorite, and our tendency here is, I think, even when I was creating this webinar, the tendency is to give everyone a lot of content and a lot of support and a lot of help, right? Ashlyn, I see you nodding your head. Very, very common. We want to support them, so let's give them as much as we possibly can. And that's our natural inclination. We want you to avoid that. We want to avoid that temptation, that drink from the fire hose saying it isn't necessarily a good thing when you're a new hire. And more is not really better. Instead of giving people more content, we want to focus on the meaning that it has for them. Why is this? So adding a bunch of content actually is hard on the brain. It's hard for what's called our cognitive load, meaning our brains can only absorb a certain amount of information at one time. It's really a matter of quality and not quantity. So if we are, an old coworker told me about an experience they had as a new joiner where they got 100 messages in their first week. So not just from HR, but from IT, from legal, and it was really impossible for them to absorb all of this. Talk about cognitive load. I think this is a perfect example. They felt very overwhelmed. And that obviously contributes to a poor onboarding experience because every day they're just wondering, did I make the right decision? That's really what onboarding is. And feeling overwhelmed certainly can make that not a great experience. So instead of giving someone all this content, we want to give the content more meaning. What does this look like? Well, you see a picture of a phone and a GPS here. One of the tricks is to give folks a sense of the path that they're going to take, a GPS. So for example, in the first message you send employees, you might say something like, over the course of your 90 days, you're going to get 10 messages from us. You're going to meet these 5 people. And by the end of our time together, you will have achieved these skills and learned these things. You're giving someone a sense of the path so they know what to expect. And Ashlyn, I know that this has brought up some thinking for you too about both this analogy and how you might put it to use.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say that, if Google Maps, for example, just gave you every single turn all at once and said, okay, try to remember all of this, it would be so much information and it would be so hard. But you can see that Google Maps lays it all out. And so if you lay everything out to your new hire and saying, here's what we have in store, here's these checkpoints, and we will tell you what you need to know when you need to know it, it gives them a sense too that you've thought this through and that they can have confidence in you and that you know what you're doing, and just kind of eases their anxieties overall. This is probably one of my favorite tips because it just overall helps them see that your organization has, invested in their experience as a new hire, and they just automatically see that you care about each touch point that you're going to have with them.
Yeah, it's very much a trust the driver scenario, right? We want to know where the driver's taking us, so they should tell us. And you can do this for your managers as well. So we know, and someone mentioned this in the pre-questions, how do you give managers this consistency as well, right? So tell them what to expect on the road. Give them that GPS message that says your new joiner is going to meet these people. They're going to have these experiences. This is what we expect of you. Set that context for them as well. So don't just pump them full of content where they don't know what's coming next and where to turn next. Give them the entire path from the get-go. Another way to give people more meaning is what we call to make your thinking visible. So why am I telling you what I'm telling you? You see here on the screen an example pin from our onboarding packet. In pin, we have a preset packet of onboarding messages that you can send both to your new joiners and to your managers. And this is an example pin from that packet. You'll see here, we very clearly try to indicate what's expected of you, what actions we want people to take. This is for the manager. And then we tell them why it's important. So why are we asking you to do this? And what impact will it have both on you and your new joiner? I think a lot of times HR, we have this context as to why, but our managers and our employees don't. So one of the ways to add more meaning is just to tell them why we're doing this. And don't worry about it being obvious, because actually that's perfectly fine. And what's obvious to us may not be obvious to them. A third way to add more meaning is to always try to connect this content to your culture and your values. So why are we asking you to do this? Well, it's part of our culture. Our value is X, and therefore this session is connected to this value. Connecting the dots for people and helping them understand, again, the meaning behind the message you're giving them is super important. All right, tip number 3. Again, there's 5 that we're sharing with you today. Tip number 3 is to, again, it's a bit of a mindset shift from sending people a one and done manual to spacing onboarding across these moments. In a hybrid environment, we know that people's location is not consistent, right? It can be different depending on obviously who the employee is and where they are, if they're in the office or not. But what's the same across hybrid is the moments. The moment of need for people, meaning what people need on their first day is going to be consistent, whether they're in the office, likely, or remote. So instead of just focusing on a bunch of information, we really want to connect it to moments in their journey. The timing of our messages really matter. So how do we do that? What do we need? Well, here on this screen, you'll see a sample from our employee journey map, which maps out those moments. And again, we mentioned this structural piece. Separate your moments into 3. So 1 will be joining the company. So what happens after they sign their offer letter? What messages or what moments matter to the employee and their manager then? 2, pre-boarding. So what happens in that week before? What can you send them to get excited and clear and help their manager prepare? And then the 3rd is onboarding. And I know Ashlyn Lucid has taken advantage of sort of separating your communication into these 3 moments.
Yeah, we've found that if you think of these kind of different stages, I guess, of the onboarding process, the pre-boarding and the onboarding, that those are experiences in and of themselves. Like it's an experience to, start getting these messages and maybe like pre-onboarding paperwork before you start. And that's already forming a first impression. And then, the onboarding once you're actually at the organization is another experience itself. So I really like what you said, Lindsey, about trying to time it to a moment, because information is going to be more relevant at a certain time of need. Like people might have more questions as they get closer to their start date. And so give them a little bit more detail as they get closer to their start date, as opposed to maybe when they first sign their offer letter, they might not need all that information right at once. So I think, yeah, I love how you said it's important to tie it to a moment.
Yeah, and some of the reasoning for that is it's very hard to recall information if it's very far away from that moment of need. So for example, we're not going to give new joiners information on offboarding when they start because A, it's not relevant, and B, it's not the point of need for them. They're not going to remember it, hopefully, 20 years down the line when they leave the organization. We really want to tie our help and support to the moment that people need it. So for example, and you can do this for managers as well, one of the key tasks that we usually ask managers to do is to write up a 60 or 90-day plan. So you can guide managers across those moments at different checkpoints to say, hey, here's your 30-day check-in, here's your 60-day check-in, here's your 90-day check-in, here's what you should do at each moment in a consistent manner versus sending one message at the very beginning, hoping that they recall and remember that it's in their inbox and hopefully remembering what to do 90 days later. So that's it. Yeah, go ahead, Ashlyn.
I was going to say that's one of our favorite things actually about using Pin. If I could give a shout out to Pin, just that we love being able to use it to like prompt our managers and check in with our managers and kind of personalize even their communications. And like our managers, experience with bringing on their new hire is just as important as the new hire's experience because they then take over the role specific training. And so they absolutely need to feel like they are set up for success there too, because, we don't have as much control over the role specific training. And so we want to make sure our managers are set up for success there too.
Absolutely. I think onboarding can be very inconsistent depending on who the manager is. And we can help alleviate some of that inconsistency by the way we communicate with our managers. And again, guide them across the journey versus sending one message and hoping that they do it and remember it. It's also, again, I think helps our manager want to take action on it because we're making it easy for them and saying you should do that this week versus a month from now. Speaking of being helpful and being direct, our fourth tip is about the way in which we communicate with our new joiners. So we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the messages themselves. And if you haven't noticed, these tips are really all about the asynchronous communication versus the synchronous. This tip is to be much more direct than perhaps we might think. And I saw that there was a pre-question in the webinar asking me if it's okay for HR to have sort of cheesy and fun language. I think that is okay, but more than that, what we want to do is we want to be helpful. And the way to be helpful is to remember that our employees and our managers, most of the time, just want to know what's expected of them. They want to know what they should do. So how can we be helpful to them? How can we be helpful to them? It's to be really action oriented. So for example, let's think about the messages that we send to our employees. We can clarify what's needed of them or what we want from them, and by the way in which we write our headlines. So if we need someone to comply, or if we need them to inform, or if we need to inform them, the way in which we write our headlines can actually change what the employee is doing or what's expected of them. So while we think sort of being casual and fun and cute language might be helpful, what can really be more specific and more helpful is to be action-oriented and topic-oriented, to clearly state what's expected of the employee by when. So let's jump back. Yeah, go ahead, Ashlyn.
I remember, Lindsey, when you were kind of helping us to reformat some of our communications, you were saying, don't be afraid to be blunt, like tell them exactly what you need from them, like no fluff.
Yeah, and I think, we want to be friendly, we want to set a good tone, and we can do that too. But I think the flip side of that is people are hunting for the information, or they're confused, or they don't have clarity. And this is a very fragile time. This is a high leverage moment when they need our help and support, and they really want to be successful, right? So let's help them be successful by being really clear in what's needed from them. So that's really very, very, very important. To be more specific, we can talk about the headlines or the subject lines that we write. And we write a lot of emails to our employees. We send a lot of pins. And the way in which we write that headline specifically can help our employees in a more consistent way. Our research from PIN shows that if people click a message, they'll read all the way through, which again tells us the subject lines matter a heck of a lot. So how can we be more helpful? How can we be more action-oriented? This is an example of a subject line that you might use to send to a new manager. It very clearly states what we need them to do, personalizes it, and tells them who that new hire is and why it's important. So instead of your new hire starts tomorrow, there's actions required of them, and we can clarify the promise of what's inside the email if they click. So we've gone through our 4 tips, and now number 5. So for those of you on the webinar who said in the poll that you're looking to redecorate, I think this tip is really for you. If you only have time to focus on one thing, the place to focus is on the firsts. So the first pre-boarding message, the first onboarding message, the first the first email the manager gets, and the first email that the manager sends to their employee. So why is this? Well, 2 reasons. Again, our data from PIN shows that the most read and clicked messages are the first ones in a moment. So the first onboarding message, the first pre-boarding message. And then 2 is something called the primacy effect, which basically tells us that there's a tendency for the information that we receive first to be what we remember most. So we can set a really strong and helpful and action-oriented tone by focusing on those first messages. All right, so we've gone through our 5 tips, and now what we want to help you do is to put these into action. So I think no one is more prepared to talk about how they put them into action than Ashlyn. And Ashlyn, I'd love for you to share some of the strategy that you've undertaken with Lucid and what you've done to make your program so successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks, Lindsey, for all of these incredible insights. I'm already thinking of ways that we can continue to improve our onboarding process at Lucid. But just a couple of takeaways or things that have really impacted our success. So I guess background again on Lucid, we have offices distributed across the world in Europe, Australia, and the US. We did go remote in March 2020, like many others, and now we're shifting to the hybrid work environment. And a lot of the factors that have set us up for success in our onboarding process have, they really go hand in hand with the tips that Lindsey has already provided. Really, I think, so kind of going through those, I would say the first thing that's really helped us is setting clear expectations from the start. So as mentioned, having that first message really outline everything that is ahead and giving them those expectations and trying to take care of maybe some of those like asynchronous things like paperwork before they start, because then when they do start, they can focus on more of those synchronous or, in person or just all together kind of meetings about the culture or your mission and values as an organization and really getting them engaged. But setting expectations from the start gives them that confidence that as an organization, you have a reliable and robust program, and then they feel like they're in good hands and they're overall less anxious. The second thing I would say that's really set us up well is personalizing the content and the communications, which helps them feel supported as an individual. I know a lot of you are probably bringing on big groups of onboarding classes. Onboarding, big groups sometimes makes it difficult to connect one-on-one with the new hire, but if you can personalize the messaging in any way, it helps them, feel that you're invested in like their own experience. And I think Lindsey might have some more information about how you can do that. Pin has really helped us with that, for example. But another factor is connecting them with people. It's hard to do that, right, when we're remote, but really investing in activities that build connections will go a long way in creating that engaged environment. Networking events, you can still do those remotely, or lunches with the team, and just getting creative and really investing budget towards these, because they do pay off in the long run to help them fill those connections. I'd also say, as another factor, is connecting them with the mission and vision of your company. That's something that's really helped at Lucid, really emphasizing our company values, letting them connect with leadership throughout orientation, and helping them learn our products. So just making sure that onboarding continually ties back to your company's overall mission and values. And then, as we've kind of mentioned too, I would say another factor of success, number 5, would be involving the managers of new hires. This helps the entire business just see that you do have a good experience for their new hires planned, that they're in good hands, and that they can trust you with their new hires, and that you're there to help them as a manager. Maybe they're a new manager, and helping them feel like they are set up well to bring on a new hire as well. But a lot of these factors, have really, we've seen them come out through our engagement scores. So for example, when we went to the remote work period back about 1.5 years ago, our onboarding engagement rating average was around 90%, but this score increased as we adapted to the remote environment, and recently, since implementing PIN and other practices to better support this environment, it's increased to a 95% average onboarding engagement rate, which is really exciting. And just overall, we've seen that the more that you invest in this process for your new hires, it's going to impact their entire experience. So it is worth it to put lots of time and energy into onboarding, I would say.
That's awesome. And, Ashlyn, I've been so impressed by the focus and the consistency and the thought that's gone into your onboarding. And it's a very high performing onboarding process, according to our PIN data, the incredibly high performing, but also incredibly impressive. And if I was a new joiner or a manager of a new joiner, I'd feel really supported by the process. So well done on that.
Well, thank you. And we really do owe a lot of our recent success to PIN and everything we've been able to do with the communications to our new hires. So thanks, Lindsey.
Oh my gosh, our pleasure. I want to go back one moment. There was a question that we skipped about what the 3rd and 4th bullet mean here. The difference is the first message a manager receives from HR, so what they need to do for their onboarding, versus the first message a new joiner receives from their manager. So both are firsts and both important. So we want to help the manager craft a really great message. And we also want to send the manager a clear, direct message that shares what's expected of them. So just want to help answer that question for all of us. So thank you, Ashlyn, for again walking through your process and how you've leveraged PIN. For those of you who are wondering, I've heard you say the word PIN a lot. What the heck is PIN? Well, we want to share that with you. So PIN, our goal is to be the first employee-centric communication platform. We want to help radically personalize the way that we communicate with our employees. And one of the ways that we do that is to use techniques from marketing to help automate our messages, to time and target and personalize the way that we communicate with our employees. So in terms of consistent onboarding and consistent messages, customers like Lucid use PIN to automate all these messages so that folks like Ashlyn don't have to worry about if people will miss it. So it's really a good check for consistency and can help free up time and space to perhaps think about more strategic initiatives. In terms of what folks use PIN for, I'd say onboarding is our most popular use case, or one of our most popular use cases, but we also support across other important employee moments like first-time managers. That's another use case that we work a lot on. And so, yes, we're we think PIN is obviously a great way to help you have a more consistent process. And like I said, no matter if someone is in a different location or a different manager, different geography, or in person or remote, can help provide a consistent, clear way to communicate with our employees across their entire journey. So we're coming to the end of our webinar. And before we open this up to your questions, I want to help digest this information for you. So help you make some meaning from all of this content that we shared and hopefully practice some of what we preached. So to help refresh your memory, these are the 5 tips that we shared. And we want to know from you, either on your own or in the chat, whatever works best for you, what resonates. So what stands out? What might these tips have in common? And what would you add or change? So what tips don't we have here? We know that we can learn a lot from the folks on this webinar. I've learned a lot from Ashlyn already and just hearing her responses. So what would you add or change? Please let us know. Ashlyn, I'm curious, as you again experience these tips, is there one that sort of resonates or is having you thinking through the process? You mentioned your wheels are turning a little bit.
Yeah. I know I definitely want to look over our very first communications to our new hires and look over how we can improve those, but just seeing ways to continue personalizing and helping it be consistent across the different environments or the different offices. But I think a lot of these tips, what they have in common is that even though onboarding is very complicated, especially with all these different factors and now moving into a hybrid work environment, you can still have a consistent experience when you really invest in it. And all these different tips really help show how that works. And that, giving your attention to it helps you empathize with the new hire and really see what their experience is and can help you understand where to make some of those improvements.
Yeah, and I would say part of I think how we work together with PIN is taking the data about how your messages are performing. So we're able to see the read rate and the click rate on your onboarding messages and then adjust them or tailor them to hopefully improve those stats. So we've seen which ones are performing extra well and which ones could use a little bit of extra love. And so that visibility and transparency helps you help your new joiners and your managers and help them feel even more confident as they start.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that our read rates have gone up since having like your input on how we can improve. I think it used to be around 58% read rate. Now it's around more like 63%. And it's just great to see like that improvement.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So speaking of improvement, we hope that these tips have helped you improve and given you something to noodle on to improve your onboarding process. And as we close today, we want to open this up to your questions. So please use the Q&A or use the chat. We would guess that there are some questions, so we would love to answer them for you. And now is the time. So please let us know.
Yeah, it looks like there's a question in the chat that says, what would be an example of what you might say in your first letter to a new hire during pre-boarding to engage and ramp up excitement? Well, I could use a kind of an example of what we like to do at Lucid. So in that first letter, of course, it's welcome to Lucid, and we're so excited to have you, some kind of congratulations, and then saying, here are 3 things we need you to do before you start, and we will send it out at this time, or just like outlining those expectations and letting them know who they can contact or reach out to, so they know that they can, any questions they have, they can reach out. But I would say just overall setting the expectations and letting them know that we're excited for them to start goes a long way. Lindsey, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say, this is an opportunity to remind their new joiners that they made the right choice. And I think across those first 90 days, or even really that first week or two, they're constantly wondering, did I make the right choice? And so the more that you can boost their confidence that they are in the right place and that the company needs them and they play a very important role to the success, the better off they'll be. So how can you personalize it to make them feel very special and a huge role and a huge part of the organization? Ashlyn, I cannot see the questions, so you might have to let me know what else you see, if any. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here, unfortunately. Now I see. Best way to measure the onboarding experience is a great question. Ashlyn, I know that you've got some metrics there already that you touched on, but what are some of the ways that you all measure your onboarding?
Yeah, we like to measure our onboarding through an engagement survey that we send out after their first week. And then at some of those touch points, at like 30 days or 90 days, and just kind of asking them overall, do they feel connected to the organization? Do they feel like they have the tools and resources they need to learn their role? Do they feel supported by their manager and their team, as well as asking about have they had their questions answered? Do they have any remaining questions or concerns? And then really taking the time to review those probably, on a weekly or twice a month basis, and seeing where you can make improvements can really help you get a pulse on what your new hires are experiencing and what their engagement rates are.
What I like about what you said, Ashlyn, is it goes beyond, I think, a typical way of measuring these experiences, which is, did you like it?
Yeah.
And you're really trying to get beyond that reaction level to a sense of learning and perhaps behavior, right? So did you learn what you wanted you to learn? Do you feel confident? Do you know what to do? That's way more important. And I think one key here is, do you want to measure the objectives that you've set? So one way to have consistency in your onboarding is to know what your objectives are. Kind of like this webinar, there's 3 objectives. We would measure our success based on your responses to those 3 objectives. So if there's no clear sense of what you want to achieve in your onboarding, it can be extra hard to measure whether or not you were successful.
Yeah, I really like that. So if one of your objectives for your new hires is to help them feel connected to the people and purposes of your organization, then asking about that and saying, do you feel like our values resonate with you, or how much do you agree with the statement that this organization is still a good fit for you, or things like that can really help you measure your onboarding experience.
Absolutely. Let's see, what other questions do you all have? We'll give it another minute or so. If you have any other questions, we'd love to help you either now or after the webinar as well. So if we didn't answer your question today, please reach out and we will be happy to connect too.
Yes, and I'm happy to share, insight or experiences as well. Happy to connect on LinkedIn and provide any insight. Oh, it looks like we do have another question. What other things might you measure for onboarding? And the example of connectedness. Yeah, I think with connectedness, some of that might factor into how they feel they, resonate with like your company's values, or if they feel like maybe they can. I think we have a question in our survey that asks, do you feel like you're comfortable asking questions and participating in meetings? That feeling of connectedness is there. But other than that, I think if you have events, where you're maybe all together over Zoom or in person, and learning about the company values all together, or meeting with someone from the executive team, it really draws people in and helps them feel that sense of connectedness with the leadership and overall like mission of the company.
I love that. And I think one way to model that connectedness is to, in part of the onboarding, have maybe old timers or parts of the executive or people from the executive team share why they're connected to the company. So what they love about it and what connects them to it, as a way to help people sort of get a sense of what other people care about, but also personalize the experience a bit for folks that they haven't met before, especially in real life.
Yes, absolutely. Another question, how do you keep a consistent process in a developed model, an ever-changing model for sure? I think if you understand your objectives, like what you're hoping your new hire will gain out of the new hire experience, then you can find, okay, well, how can we tweak this meeting to still accomplish that purpose or that objective? And you'll see like what factors may actually be more flexible than you thought. Like, oh, if we thought we always had to be in person for a certain meeting, well, why is that? Can we still accomplish the objective of the meeting of helping them feel, connected to our values by actually maybe doing something remotely? So it's just kind of tying everything back to your purpose and seeing how you can maybe be more flexible there. And then perhaps to just finding ways to connect across different like time zones if possible. That can get a little tricky, but especially where you have offices in different locations, perhaps it's important to be intentional about if all your offices can even have a chance to try to connect with people from other offices as well.
No, we in HR, I think we are the gatekeeper of this process, the owner of this process. And Ashlyn, I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I was leading onboarding, I think everyone wanted a part, everyone wanted to present, everybody wanted to share. And it's hard to say no because we want to include people, we want to add all this content. And especially as the organization changes and more people want to get involved and we scale and it's challenging. And that's why having these clear objectives and saying, does this presentation or does this session meet the objective, yes or no, is able to help sort of set those boundaries and set that context, and again, have a consistent experience across the entire organization.
Yes.
And also helps us swap out presentations or swap out components as long as they meet the objective.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions if there's any additional ones here.
We do have a question. What tools do we use at Lucid to survey our new hires? We do use Culture Amp for our survey data. That's our primary method of measuring engagement.
Awesome. And I'll give another plug for PIN in order to measure the communication, right? And if it's being received and opened and read, I think a lot of times we send these communications out and we sort of cross our fingers and hope that they're being read, and we don't know. And so again, being able to filter our communication and personalize it across different groups and different geographies, and then know how it's landing can help us improve our process and hopefully make it more consistent.
Yes, we love PIN for that as well, understanding what's being read, what messages are most effective and influencing the experience. So absolutely, yes, we rely on PIN really heavily for our onboarding process.
Awesome. Well, I think this is it. Ashlyn, I want to say thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your process with us and your time. And thank you to everyone who joined us and those watching later. Really appreciate you joining, and we'd love to hear from you and support you in your consistent hybrid onboarding journey. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thank you everybody for your questions. I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to connect with everybody. So yeah, please reach out if we can help answer anything at all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.